The Vampire Queen. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful kingdom. The kingdom was peaceful and full of happiness. People lived in small villages surrounded by green fields and tall trees. The sky was always blue, and the sun shone brightly every day. In this kingdom lived a young prince. He was kind and brave, with a heart full of love for his people. The prince was loved by everyone, and he loved his kingdom in return. The prince's father, the king, ruled the land with wisdom and care. Under his rule, the kingdom prospered, and the people lived without fear. But not everything was perfect. Recently, people in the kingdom had started talking about a dark forest at the edge of their land. They said strange things happened there, and some villagers who went near the forest never came back. This made the people worried, and they spoke of a terrible creature that might live in the shadows. The king decided to send the young prince to find out what was happening and to protect the kingdom from any danger. The prince was excited to go on this quest. He wanted to prove himself and make his father proud. So, with his sword and his loyal companions, the prince set out on his journey to the dark forest, not knowing what awaited him there. The prince and his companions traveled for days. They went through sunny fields and quiet villages. The people they met were kind, giving them food and water. Everyone wished them luck on their journey. One day, they reached a small village near the dark forest. The village looked strange. It was quiet, and the houses seemed empty. As they walked through the village, the prince noticed something odd. There were strange flowers growing everywhere. The flowers had dark purple petals and glowed faintly in the moonlight. While exploring, the prince found an old woman sitting outside one of the houses. She looked scared and tired. The prince asked her what happened to the villagers. The old woman whispered, "They went into the forest and never came back. The flowers appeared after they left. They say a beautiful creature lives in the forest. She is dangerous, but no one believes it." The prince's companions thought the old woman was just telling stories, but the prince felt uneasy. The old woman's words stayed in his mind. He wondered if the flowers and the missing villagers were connected. Could there really be a dangerous creature in the forest? That night, the prince couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the old woman's words and the strange flowers. He began to doubt if the journey would be as easy as he first thought. The seed of doubt had been planted in his heart. The next morning, the prince and his companions entered the dark forest. The trees were tall and thick, blocking out the sunlight. It felt cold and quiet, with only the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The prince kept thinking about the strange flowers and the old woman's warning. As they walked deeper into the forest, they came across more of the purple flowers. The prince noticed that the flowers seemed to grow only in certain areas, like a path leading somewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about them. What did they mean? Why did they glow at night? After some time, they found an old, abandoned house in the forest. Inside, the prince discovered a dusty book on a table. It looked like a journal. As he flipped through the pages, he read about a queen of night, a beautiful but mysterious figure who lived in the forest. The journal talked about how people who saw her were never the same again. The prince became obsessed with the idea of the Queen of Night. He kept wondering if she was the creature the old woman mentioned. He wanted to know more about her and why she was connected to the flowers and the missing villagers. The prince couldn't stop thinking about the journal's vague descriptions and the strange beauty of the flowers. He decided to follow the trail of flowers, hoping it would lead him to answers. His companions were worried, but the prince was determined. He had to know the truth, even if it meant facing danger. The prince's obsession grew stronger, and he felt that he was getting closer to something important, something that would change everything. As the prince and his companions followed the trail of purple flowers, the forest grew darker and more mysterious. The prince couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. He kept looking around, expecting to see something or someone hiding in the shadows. One night, while they were resting by a small campfire, the prince had a strange dream. He dreamed of a beautiful woman with long, dark hair and glowing eyes. She stood among the purple flowers, calling to him. When he woke up, the prince felt both scared and excited. He wondered if the woman in his dream was the Queen of Night. The prince's companions noticed that he was acting different. He was quieter, always lost in thought. He seemed obsessed with finding the Queen of Night. They tried to talk to him, telling him to be careful, but the prince wouldn't listen. He felt like he was on the verge of discovering something important, something that could explain the strange things happening in the forest. As they went deeper into the forest, the prince's paranoia grew. He started to mistrust his own companions, thinking they might try to stop him from finding the queen. He felt like they were hiding things from him or talking behind his back. He even began to wonder if they were under some kind of spell from the forest. One day, the prince noticed one of his companions, a loyal knight, whispering with another. The prince couldn't hear what they were saying, but he felt sure they were planning something. That night, the prince stayed awake, pretending to sleep. He kept watching his companions, waiting for them to do something suspicious. The more the prince thought about the Queen of Night and the purple flowers, the more he felt like he was losing control. He was scared but also fascinated. He had to find the truth, even if it meant losing everything. The prince's obsession and paranoia grew stronger, pulling him deeper into the darkness of the forest and his own mind. As the days passed, strange things started to happen. The prince began seeing things that weren't there. When he looked at the purple flowers, they seemed to move, like they were alive. Sometimes, he thought he saw faces in the shadows of the trees, watching him with glowing eyes. One night, the prince had another dream, but it felt so real. In the dream, he walked through the forest and found a beautiful castle hidden among the trees. The castle was covered in the purple flowers. Inside, he saw the Queen of Night. She smiled at him and held out her hand, inviting him to come closer. The prince felt drawn to her, but as he reached out, he woke up. The prince was shaken by the dream. He felt like the Queen of Night was trying to communicate with him. He couldn't tell if the dreams were just his imagination or if she was really reaching out to him. The line between reality and fantasy became blurry. He started seeing the queen's face everywhere. In the trees, in the water of a stream, even in the fire at night. The prince's companions noticed that he was acting more strange. He talked to himself and seemed distant. Sometimes, he would stare into the distance, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. The prince began to doubt his own senses. He wasn't sure if what he saw and heard was real or just in his mind. One day, as they walked deeper into the forest, the prince saw a vision of the missing villagers. They were wandering through the forest, their eyes empty and their movements slow. They seemed lost, like they were searching for something. The vision scared the prince. He wondered if the villagers were under the queen's spell, trapped in the forest forever. The prince's visions and strange occurrences continued, making him feel more confused and afraid. He didn't know what was real anymore. The Queen of Night and the mystery of the purple flowers consumed his thoughts. The prince felt like he was being pulled into a dark and twisted world, where nothing made sense. He was losing himself to the visions and the forest's strange magic. As the prince struggled with his visions and doubts, his companions grew worried. One of them, a loyal knight who had known the prince since childhood, tried to help him. The knight spoke gently, trying to bring the prince back to reality. He reminded the prince of their mission, to protect the kingdom and find out what happened to the missing villagers. But the prince was torn. He felt a strange connection to the Queen of Night, even though he had only seen her in dreams and visions. He began to think that maybe the queen wasn't evil. Maybe she was trapped and needed help. The knight noticed the prince's hesitation and tried to convince him otherwise. The knight warned the prince that the queen could be dangerous. He said that the visions and dreams might be tricks, meant to lure the prince deeper into the forest. The knight insisted that they should leave the forest and return to the kingdom. But the prince was unsure. He felt like the knight was trying to stop him from finding the truth. The Queen of Night's presence seemed to grow stronger. The prince started hearing her voice, soft and sweet, whispering in his mind. She told him that the knight and the other companions couldn't be trusted. They were afraid of the truth and wanted to keep him away from her. The prince didn't know what to believe. The queen's voice was comforting, but it also made him feel uneasy. One evening, while the prince and the knight were alone, the prince confronted him. He asked the knight if he believed the queen was a monster. The knight hesitated before saying yes, but the prince saw doubt in his eyes. The prince wondered if the knight was hiding something, maybe even being influenced by the queen's magic. The prince felt more confused and isolated. He didn't know who to trust. The knight's words and the queen's voice kept clashing in his mind. The prince felt like he was being pulled in two directions, one towards safety and home, and the other towards the mysterious and dangerous unknown. As the forest grew darker around them, the prince felt like he was losing control. The influence from the knight and the queen's voice made him question everything he knew. He had to make a choice, but he wasn't sure what was real and what was a lie. The prince was caught in a web of manipulation, struggling to find his own path. The prince couldn't shake off the feeling that something big was about to happen. He felt like he was close to finding the truth. One night, the prince decided to follow the purple flowers alone, without his companions. He told them he needed some time to think, but really, he wanted to find the Queen of Night on his own. The forest was silent and dark as the prince walked deeper into it. The air felt colder, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets. After walking for what felt like hours, the prince came to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing stood an old, crumbling castle. The castle was covered in the glowing purple flowers, just like in his dreams. The prince entered the castle cautiously. Inside, everything was quiet and empty. The only sound was the soft rustling of the flowers in the wind. As he walked through the halls, he finally saw her. The Queen of Night. She stood at the end of a long corridor, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. The queen was even more beautiful than in his dreams. She smiled at the prince and welcomed him. She told him that she had been waiting for him, knowing he would come. The prince felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. He asked her about the missing villagers and the strange flowers. The queen's smile faded. She told the prince the truth. She was a vampire, cursed to live in the castle forever. She explained that she needed to feed on the life force of others to survive, but she never meant to harm anyone. The villagers who went missing had become her thralls, bound to serve her in the castle. They were not dead, but neither were they truly alive. The prince felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected something dark, but hearing it from the queen herself made it real. The queen continued, saying that the curse was not her fault. She had been cursed long ago by a powerful witch. The purple flowers were a part of the curse, growing wherever she went. They were beautiful but deadly, trapping anyone who came too close. The prince was shocked by the revelation. He didn't know what to think. The queen seemed sad and lonely, trapped in a terrible situation. But she was also dangerous, and her very existence threatened the kingdom. The prince realized that his quest had led him to a dark truth, one that would change everything. He had to decide what to do next, knowing that whatever choice he made would have serious consequences. The prince stood in the castle, facing the Queen of Night. Her eyes were filled with sadness, and her voice was soft as she spoke. She told the prince that she didn't want to be a monster. She wished for freedom from the curse, to live a normal life, and to stop hurting others. She asked the prince for his help. The queen explained that the only way to break the curse was to destroy the source of her power, an ancient artifact hidden deep within the castle. However, she warned that destroying the artifact would end her life and the lives of her thralls. She asked the prince to make a choice. He could break the curse and free the villagers, or he could let her continue living, knowing that she would have to feed on others to survive. The prince felt torn. He understood the queen's pain and loneliness, and part of him wanted to help her. But he also knew that if she continued to live, more people would be in danger. He thought about the missing villagers and their families, who were waiting for their return. He realized that no matter what he chose, there would be a cost. The queen then made a surprising offer. She told the prince that she could turn him into a vampire like her. They could live together forever, free from the curse's control. The prince would have to leave his old life behind, but he would gain eternal life and the power to help her protect the castle and its secrets. The prince was shocked by the offer. He thought about his family, his kingdom, and the responsibilities he had. He knew he couldn't abandon his duty, but the idea of eternal life was tempting. He could stay with the queen, the person he felt strangely connected to, and they could find another way to live without harming others. The prince stood in silence, thinking about the choice before him. He could break the curse and free the villagers, even if it meant losing the queen forever. Or he could stay with her, accepting a new, uncertain life. It was a life-changing decision, and the prince knew that whatever he chose, there would be no turning back. He had to decide between his duty and his heart, knowing that both paths were filled with risks and sacrifices. The prince stood before the Queen of Night, his heart heavy with the decision he had to make. He looked into her eyes, filled with hope and sadness, and knew that whatever he chose would change everything. Slowly, the prince reached out his hand. The queen's eyes widened in surprise. The prince took a deep breath, ready to speak his choice. But before he could say anything, the ground beneath them began to shake. The castle walls trembled, and the purple flowers glowed brighter. The prince felt the power of the curse pulsing around them. He realized that the castle itself was reacting to his decision. As if it knew the end was near, the queen reached out to him, her hand trembling. The air was filled with tension, and the prince felt a strange calmness wash over him. As the castle continued to shake, the prince made his decision. He moved closer to the queen, their hands almost touching. But just as he was about to speak, the ground gave a sudden, violent lurch. The room filled with a bright, blinding light. The prince closed his eyes, feeling the world around him blur and fade. When he opened his eyes, everything was still. The light was gone, and the castle was silent. The prince found himself standing alone in the empty hall, with no sign of the queen or the purple flowers. He felt a cold breeze, and the air smelled fresh, like the morning after a storm. The prince looked around, confused and unsure of what had just happened. He called out for the queen, but there was no answer. He walked through the castle, finding it empty and lifeless. The curse seemed to have vanished. But the prince couldn't tell if he had broken it or if something else had happened. As he stood in the doorway of the castle, looking out into the dark forest, the prince felt a mix of relief and worry. He didn't know if the queen was free or if she was gone forever. He wondered if he had made the right choice or if he had missed his chance to change everything. With a heavy heart, the prince stepped out of the castle and walked into the forest. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the trees. The prince knew he had to return to his kingdom and face whatever awaited him. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. The fate of the queen and the truth of what had happened remained a mystery, leaving the prince with more questions than answers. The story ended with the prince's uncertain fate, leaving the reader to wonder what really happened in the castle and what the future held for the prince and the kingdom.